Lawyers of Reddit, what was your whole IT moment where you knew you would win? Not a lawyer but got robbed at gunpoint in my home. Long story short, he would have gone to prison anyway, but the kicker is that the shoes he wore to court were the same shoes he stole from my house. Judge asked if I wanted them back. I said yes. Judge made him take them off in court and walk back in socks. Donated the shoes. It was more about the principle. Leaving the courthouse with a new pair of old shoes is something most haven't done. We had some huge issues with the landlord. Trying to enter without letting us know beforehand. Not answering to fix issues. Very aggressive when talking with us. When he decided to sell the place, he didn't check with us about the visits and just showed up randomly with potential buyers. We told him to get lost. He eventually left but called us the same evening to threaten us. We sent emails to remind him of our rights as tenants and he answered by threatening us some more in an email. We eventually end up in a small issues court. Not from the US. Don't know the name. And he fabricates a story about how we are terrible tenants and we try to discourage buyers. We just showed the judge the emails as well as the open complaint to the police we filled a few days earlier. The judge couldn't believe it and gave him a formal warning. Gave us 3 free months of rent. In the end the guy just used a real estate company to sell the place. All went smoothly and we still live there with lovely landlords that aren't completely bonkers. My client was riding his motorcycle on a relatively calm street when this guy exited his garage without looking and run over him. In deposition, the guy brought a witness that was with him on the passenger's seat. The whole time, the witness maintained that my client was driving too fast and that there was no time to brake the car. I asked him the same question a few times in different ways, making him tell the story again. In the fourth telling, he, already a bit frustrated, let it slip. Look, I've already told you. We were exiting the garage and, as soon as I lifted up from getting my cell phone on the car's carpet, wait. So you didn't even see the crash? There was no coming back from that. At this moment he knew. He fricked up. Parent termination case I was prosecuting. Dad went on how he has changed his life around and worked the AA program. Asked him what step he was on, and he proudly proclaimed 3. Asked him what step 3 is. He had no idea. Then asked him step 2 was. Again, no idea. Parental rights terminated. It was my 3rd month of practice. I was in family law at the time, representing mom in a petition for a restraining order against boyfriend dad. At issue in the broader case was child visitation, custody, support, etc. But today's hearing was just on the RO. We had pretty good facts but it was mostly based on testimony of the parties. My client was way more reputable as a witness so I was feeling confident. 10 minutes before the hearing, my client shows up. I give her a last minute prep on what to expect and then she says I'm glad I'm going through with this. I can't deal with it anymore and he's just getting worse. To top it off, he left me a drunken, ranting voicemail on Saturday. You have your phone with you? Yes. We play the voicemail and it's a full 2 minutes of ex-boyfriend screaming crap like I should have freaking killed you when we were together. You were always such a b. I hope you burn to death in a fire. I didn't have time to ask her why the frick she hadn't said anything to me about the voicemail before the bailiff called our case. We sit. The judge asks if either side has additional evidence, and I ask for permission to play the voicemail. Ex-boyfriend, who didn't have an attorney, didn't object. So I played the whole nasty 2-minute rant in open court. Judge goes, we're going to take a brief recess before I issue my ruling. If the parties want to meet and confer in the hall, they are welcome to. Boyfriend knew he was fricked. We settled the whole dang case then and there. My client got a wish list in terms of custody, supervised visitation, child support, plus the restraining order, to boot. I had a client charged with battery. The alleged victim didn't really support the prosecution's case and in any event was reluctant to testify. They still had another witness though, and she said that my client was hitting the alleged victim, so it wasn't looking great. The prosecutor and I were talking before court started, hanging out by the courtroom doors, when the witness walked in. She looked right at my client, who was sitting not 5 feet from me, then scanned the room and said, "Where is?" Client named the prosecutor and I looked at each other for a minute, and then he said he needed to check on something. When I saw him a few minutes later, he told me he was dismissing the case. Not a lawyer, but I'm currently in a custody battle. Mother is saying I can't be trusted because I've been refusing to take our child to the therapist. The therapist testified I couldn't bring our child in because therapy must have both parents' consent, and mother has retracted consent. When I practiced insurance defense, was handed a file to take over of a slip and fall. Guy tripped on a hose, tore his ACL. The partner had taken the guy's depot already, so I read the transcript. I'm a Michigan football fan, watched every game for 20 years. This guy testified he was the starting safety for a certain rival for certain years. Also that he graduated with a double major that doesn't exist at that school. I immediately knew this was false. Partner didn't understand. Dug deeper, lied about so much stuff unrelated to the fall for no reason. Eventually found high school records from football injuries of head trauma, knee injuries, and a slip and fall injury a few months after ours. He also testified he rehabbed an ACL surgery after 1 month. Motion for fraud on the court filed. Immediately settled. Very abbreviated, I was prosecuting a convenience store owner for luring a young girl, who regularly came into the store, back to her part of the store to grope, fondle and kiss her. Child enticement. It was the only section of the store without surveillance camera coverage. They were in the back room for about 2 minutes and 17 seconds. For the timestamp on the videos, of the many arguments the defense put on, one was there was no way there was enough time for anything to happen. In my rebuttal on closing, I asked the jury to imagine what could happen in the room in that amount of time, and I asked them to all close their eyes while I timed out 2 minutes and 17 seconds on my watch, in silence. After about 60 seconds, 2 of the jurors started crying. Knew it was going to be guilty right then. I asked them to all close their eyes while I timed out 2 minutes and 17 seconds on my watch, in silence. Holy crap, that was a clever idea. Not only emphasized how long the time period was but also let their imaginations run riot. I worked on a case involving defective processors. In discovery we got emails from the defendant's engineers that had worked on the processors. They were in an Asian country but the emails were in English because they were going to US executives. One of the more senior engineers basically laid out the exact defect we were suing over, explaining what the problem was and why it was their fault, and finishing with "this is big problem, we ship crap to customer." Needless to say we hit them over the head with that in mediation, and they settled shortly after. Engineer being ignored. The sky is blue. I suck at haiku. My mom hit a guy on a bike with her car in a parking lot. She claimed he hit her. She also wanted to countersue the cyclist for scaring her. In her deposition she started every sentence with "when I hit him." When I compared the scanned copy of the deed provided by the other side's lawyers to the original my client eventually got around to providing, the scanned copy provided by the other side had a witness signature. The original did not. Obligatory. Not mine but my mom's story. She was fighting for custody on behalf of the father, trying to prove that the kids were living in subpar conditions with their drug addict mother in spite of the ample child support provided. It was a tough case because courts are so hesitant to pull kids away from their moms. Then the mom burst out that she had been feeding the kids cat food as proof that she wouldn't let them starve. Needless to say, the judge didn't take that as a good reason for the kids to stay with their mom. My client was accused of brutally murdering a dog. Cop testified that there was no testing of the blood, no body ever found, and admitted it could have, in fact, run away. The eyewitness said she could see the killing down the hallway from the dining room. Cop testified there was no hallway and the dining room was on a different level of the house than the killing supposedly took place. Then the person who was leading the lynch mob against my client around town for the last year testified that she had been in the apartment between the 2 visits by the cop to evaluate the scene. No body, a compromised crime scene, witness who couldn't see anything, and admission that there was no proof the dog was dead. Closing argument lasted 3 seconds. Your Honor, I'm asking for an acquittal. Not a lawyer, but we had no evidence that the woman who slammed into my stopped car going 85 miles per hour was drunk, until she indignantly admitted it on tape in her deposition. She busted into my deposition and demanded she go first because I was a lying bee. She excitedly told my lawyer that the police report was wrong because it said she was coming from the movie theater when she was actually coming from her friend's bar. Did you have anything to drink at your friend's bar? Of course. How many drinks? I dunno. They just keep my glass full. Did you take any medicine that day? Methadone and low blood pressure medicine. I see. The cops had refused to breathalyze her at the scene because her husband was a firefighter that they knew personally. They told her to go home, sober up, and go to the hospital later. I heard the whole thing but had no proof until she handed it to me. They settled same day. I was testifying for the defense. A young man had been arrested for assaulting a police officer, allegedly throwing bottles during some unrest in Oakland following the verdict in the trial for the cop who shot Oscar Grant in the back on the BART platform. I had been there filming stuff, caught his arrest on video, and his brother found my footage on YouTube and asked me to testify. I had only seen bottles being thrown from this one corner of a parking lot, from behind me, with the bottles flying over my shoulder. The defendant was in a group in front of me. On the stand, the prosecutor seemed to think I knew the defendant and was there basically committing perjury on his behalf. I explained why I had been there that night, that I had never seen this guy before, hadn't been coached by the defense, and hadn't been paid other than a small amount for my travel and time. Finally, exasperated after much back and forth, the prosecutor says, "Well, if you don't know the defendant, then why are you here testifying for him?" I thought for a moment and said, "I guess I just wouldn't want an innocent man to get convicted for a crime he didn't commit." He got visibly flustered and quickly moved on, trying to insinuate that if I didn't know him, how would I have known to be looking in his direction to see whether he was throwing things? And I tried explaining that if you're looking at a group of random people, and one of them throws something, you will naturally fixate your attention on that person. But because nobody in that group threw anything, there was nothing to notice in the first place. It looked like the police just grabbed him at random. They rested, the defense attorney bought me lunch down the street, and then he got a call from his colleague that the jury took all of 10 minutes to return a not guilty verdict on the assault charge. They said my response was legendary though, and that no attorney should ever ask a question they don't already know the answer to. This guy just seemed to have a narrative about a prior relationship to the defendant that he assumed was accurate, and was trying to call my credibility into question. At a restraining order trial, it was essentially my client's word versus his, regarding a sexual assault. He did a good job dressing up and acting very appropriate during most of his testimony, but then he was asked a series of open-ended questions and he said something to the effect that she kept coming up on me with that freaking pee, allegedly during a lecture, and as soon as he said it, a look came on his face and the judge's face, and everyone knew the ruse of a respectable young gentleman had failed. I won. Good job. That's what a good lawyer does. Get them talking and they usually win the case for you. I trapped a defendant pretty badly one time. He testified in a depot he had a green arrow for his left turn and that my client ran the red. Unfortunately for him, the additional turn lane arrow was installed 2 months after the wreck. Case settled for policy limits a week later. Not a lawyer. Years ago I had to do something at a strip mall in a bad part of town. Took me about 20 minutes and then I found that my car had been towed. Ubered to the tow yard. Giant sign says cash only. Had to call another Uber, drive to the ATM and back, and pay them $300 some bucks. Got a crappy handwritten receipt that, believe it or not, was itemized. Went home, googled, found that they violated the law in 3 separate ways. Towed illegally refused to accept credit cards, and had multiple charges that the law called unreasonable, like dolly fees and load-unload fees. Took them to small claims court. The judge began by asking the tow yard owner about his relationship with the property owner and how the decision was made to tow my car. Oh, the slimy tow truck dude answered, "My cousin works there. If he says tow, I tow. It's 100% legal." The judge's eyebrows begin to rise. But, the dude continued, "But what I detest the most, Your Honor, is this butthole claiming I don't take credit cards. I'm a businessman. I take credit cards all the time. He's a lowlife that does not have any credit cards. That's why he wanted to pay cash. I was having a whole IT overload, and the judge saw me smiling and hopping in my seat and patting my manila folder of receipts. "Do you actually not have any credit or debit cards?" the judge asked me. I pulled out my wallet and showed him, and then I pulled out a time-stamped photo of the cash-only sign I took the day of, and another one I took the morning of the hearing. The guy mumbled something like "okay, you got me there," and then had nothing but "ha." I didn't know that when the judge asked him about the legality of each unreasonable itemized charge. Anyway, each violation pays double the total tow charge, and since there were 3, that's how I made $1,800 on a $300 investment. I can't believe I'm about to use a "not a lawyer but" loan, but here goes. LOL. Tried to sell my home myself and the buyers wanted a term period for land contract before getting their own mortgage. I agreed to 1 year, had a simple contract drawn up, and after we both signed it everything seemed fine. Within 30 days the present me with their own legally drawn up land contract that was pages long to protect their investment. About page 3 it very clearly stated that if for any reason the home burns down, purchaser will receive all insurance proceeds. First, I still had a mortgage and the proceeds would legally go to pay that off. Second, that's a pretty targeted thing to say. Not lawyers' terms of the house being destroyed, and it's surrounded by woods and waterways, just if it burnt down. Page 4 stated that this would remain a land contract until my mortgage was paid in full, so they'd never buy outright. I returned it to them with a letter stating those two things were never happening and I wasn't signing. They stopped paying, so I began eviction. 6 months later the lawyer I hired was an idiot and I'm sitting down with their lawyer myself. He brings out the contract they'd tried giving me and began talking about their ironclad case due to the agreement. I asked him to show me my signature. The look on his face when he realized it wasn't there. After we talked it turned out he knew them and wrote the contract without the burn the house down stipulation. Seems they added it, and under the belief it was a long-term land contract. Not only did I win, I'm pretty sure they lost a lawyer friend. When I found a video on Facebook of the plaintiff squatting £300 the month before his deposition, that was a good one. Oh, he was saying he couldn't work and had back injuries after a minor car accident. These sorts of people make my blood boil. My dad hurt his back badly when I was a kid and it took him years to be totally pain-free and have full movement. Even now, like 20-25 years later, his back isn't 100%. I was reviewing the transcript of an interview with a child. The child made incriminating statements against my client. At one point, when discussing the allegations, the child used an odd word, but I didn't think much of it. A few days later, I was watching a video of the child interacting with their grandmother, who hates my client, from about a week before that interview. The grandmother used the exact same odd word in the exact context the child later used it. At that moment, it became clear that child had been coached. It was the first real aha moment of my career. I mean my blood boils when people coach children and use them in this way. You are a disgusting post to use a child like this. No one ever knows if a child is lying or telling the truth moving forward, which makes them so vulnerable. And the kid themselves just is destroyed by the lie. Sometimes they start to believe the lie. People suck. My client has been keeping her son away from the father because the father has a new child. She is concerned that her son will act violently towards the new child and she could be held liable. Judge, that's not even a defense. Man, this sounds like a really sad family situation for the older half-brother. Sounds like his mom is pissed that his dad has moved on, so she refuses to cooperate and wants her kid to hate his dad and the new baby. Not exactly a knew you would win moment, but I got a hidden shout out from a federal judge in a ruling that I consider to be one of the high points of my career. Here's what happened. Before a hearing for an emergency injunction against USDA, I was watching the hearing before mine, a trademark infringement case. At the end of that hearing, the judge accidentally used a pun and could not stop laughing. She was literally crying. I decided at that moment I was going to intentionally use a pun in my hearing. I did. I accused USDA of engaging in a shell game by illegally diverting some federal funds to an egg industry trade group. The judge called me on it, but laughed heartily. My client won. The judge threatened to put the Secretary of Agriculture in jail. A major newspaper reporting on the case said the judge winced at my puns but agreed with my arguments. False. When the written ruling was issued, the last sentence said that an injunction was issued against USDA's use of the funds for any plans they may be hatching. Undeniable shout out. This, ladies and gentlemen and everyone else, is why you brush up on your pun game. I clerked for a judge and we had a low-level thief in our courtroom who had robbed one of his neighbor's houses in the winter in Colorado, and all the police had to do was follow the footsteps back to his house where he was hanging out with the stolen items and a small amount of drugs and a crappy handgun. Idiot. We had a local guy call the cops and claim his truck was stolen. Found shortly after crashed through a fence into a pole. Footprints in the snow led right to his front door. Somehow he knew the right people and got away with it. Not a lawyer, but I played one in small claims court. My lease had an exit clause that said if I fronted 2 months rent, they would work to lease my place and return anything unused. I checked with the office ahead of time. They ensured me there was a waiting list, so I gave them the 2 months and moved. They never returned a dime. I talked to the new tenant and confirmed they moved in a week later. In court, the judge was commenting on how he didn't see anything explicitly saying they would return any unused rent, even though that intent was stated to me a few times. Dumbo from the leasing office piped in with, "Your Honor, in almost every case we can return some money, but in this case we didn't have a tenant in the 2 months after he left." So she gave the case back to me and I presented the affidavit from the new tenant confirming the move-in date. Judge awarded me double what they owed. Turns out leasing office Dumbus 1 and 2 thought they could lie to me and return my excess rent money to themselves. Bought a hurricane door from a contractor that was found through our state's hurricane readiness website. He took $5,000 and after about 3 weeks of car or scheduling issues, finally just ghosted us. Took him and his company to court. The him and his company part is important. Finally court day shows up and I'm fairly young and unoptimistic, so I figure I don't need a lawyer. Plus the local news station took my story and came out to interview me to do a bit on it. I figure it is a fairly obvious case. Easy win. I put on my best, only $99 suit and head downtown. Dude doesn't show but instead sent his company's office manager. We get settled in with the arbiter. First thing I was wrong about. Oh crap. Not court with a judge and crap. And the office manager starts in that they deny my claims and in fact are counter-suing me for cancelling the contract. I start to sweat. Like oh crap. They're going after me? What happens if they believe them? I'm going to be out $5,000 and have to pay them more? FML. The arbiter listens to her and then asks me to tell my side. I told him. Plus show documentation of what I had did and when. Arbiter dude looks at her and says he has enough to prove you wrong by even if he didn't. Because your boss Michael Blabla couldn't even be bothered to show up when he himself was specifically named in the suit. I'm ruling in the plaintiff's favor. Cue me trying not to happy dance or look too smug before I got out of that room. Side note, just because you win a judgment against someone, that doesn't mean you will get paid. You still owe me $5,000 Michael. Contact the court. Get a real lawyer. You will get your money back. Not a lawyer, but was working as a paralegal for a law firm. We were defending a claim which had run into tens of thousands of pounds against our client, a holiday home, by a woman who had tripped over a speed bump while walking back to her caravan and damaged her knee. The fall was genuine. The question was whose fault this was. She claimed it was the holiday home's fault because she hadn't seen the speed bump due to low lighting, poor marking, etc. The claim had, outrageously, gone to months and made it to court. Going through the various questions to her, when our barrister asked how she knew the speed bump was poorly marked or something similar, her response, "Well, I remember thinking how it wasn't well marked when I was walking up to it." Needless to say, it was a short day in court after that point. Sued a former employer for $3,500 in unpaid wages. It was a slam dunk. Had a letter stating what my salary would be versus pay stubs that were less. So I didn't bother getting a lawyer to save on fees. It turns out the company thought they could try the same strategy. I show up to court and the manager of the local office is there with an affidavit from the CEO saying he's allowed to represent the company in court. The judge asks him, "Are you an attorney?" "No, just an employee. A company can't have pro se representation." Judge immediately ruled in my favor. Felt freaking fantastic. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.